Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to be bringing you along with me as I try to sort of organize this drawer. This is a drawer in the kitchen, and right now it's being used for mostly a lot of containering type things that you would use maybe when you're done with cooking or baking, from sort of Ziploc style sandwich bags, as well as aluminum foil, parchment paper, saran cling wrap, things like that. I'm also going to try and transform this drawer into sort of a drink drawer, or things that you would have related to drinks. So coffee and tea and drink stirs and sugar packets, coffee creamers, and a bunch of miscellaneous sauce packets that I happen to have, and pretzel salt, sorts of little things that they seem like they're not necessarily much, but if you don't have them, suddenly everything comes to a halt, such as a lighter to make sure that your stove is working okay and things like that. So one of the questions you might have is, why is this type of a video on this channel, and how is it related to brain injury? So I would say that this is sort of maybe a real world example of an OT, or an occupational therapy activity, mixed with some speech therapy related type things. So right now I'm going to show you an example of this really great hack. So you get sort of, this is just a generic sandwich box container with sort of the Ziploc style sandwich bags inside, and you can see it opens normally from the side, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pair of kitchen shear scissors, and I'm actually going to cut along the top side of it so that I can remove sort of this little bit of a strange shape that the regular cutout, the manufacturer cutout, sort of leaves behind. And the reason for this is we want to sort of minimize the amount of visual clutter that we see in the drawer. From an OT perspective, this is sort of helping to have more visual differentiation so that you can, your eyes won't get as distracted. And so as you can see, now that those green and white bits are all removed from the top, these little remainder bits, we're going to set them aside and save them for later. When you look at the actual box now, it's just a lot easier to see. So from an OT perspective, we're definitely utilizing our hands in terms of moving things around. And basically it's sort of like a really big real-life jigsaw puzzle. The closest I can think of is there's this game that I used to work a lot with in OT. I will try to include a snapshot of the photo, the name of it, if I can remember it right here. But in the game, which was honestly not one of my favorite activities because it was so difficult for me. It's still difficult for me. But basically with the game, you had to manipulate things with your hands, these little cars in a pretend parking garage, and basically try to get them out of the parking garage without picking up any of them. So it involved having to move and shift stuff around. I'd also say that this is a mix of another OT activity, which is sort of like Connects. I spent probably at least a month and a half, if not more, worth of OT sessions trying to put together this Connects style helicopter with my hands, from looking at an image and then trying to build it out. And you have to sort of manipulate the pieces in your hands and rotate them and realize that when you change their orientation, sort of X, Y, and Z axis, sort of in a 3D space, the same type of, I don't know, tool or material that you're working with, a little puzzle piece, can look completely different when you turn it over or flip it upside down or shift it 90 degrees. So I would say that this activity is very much utilizing and building upon those types of skills that you work on with those particular OT activities. So I'm realizing now I probably should have said it a little bit earlier, but if you have vestibular issues or issues with eye tracking, or things that you would cover sort of in vision rehab, you might want to look away for some of this video and just, close your eyes and listen to what I'm talking about. I say this just because there's a bunch of camera movement. I'm still trying to figure things out, and I just haven't figured out a good overhead setup, so I'm just trying to hold it with my other hand, and watching some of this I think can feel a little bit nauseating. So if you're one of those folks, don't feel badly. I feel similarly too, so just maybe look away for bits and pieces of this. And also at the very end of the video, I'd recommend probably not watching the very last few minutes of the video, just looking away and listening along, because I think the amount of movement is a bunch. So as you see here, I'm just going to snip off the side bits so that of this coffee pod container, just so that everything is a little bit more open and easier to access and less visually cluttered. If you happen to drink decaf coffee, by the way, this one's actually kind of nice. If you like decaf flavored coffee, this is a decaf hazelnut cream or creme. It's quite tasty. So once again, I'm going to sort of set aside these little scraps that I'm cutting off and put them to the side and take a look at them for later. So I think this is also sort of a really good example of use what you have. So I think in a lot of sort of really beautiful organization photos, there are these really pretty, often like acrylic or wicker baskets or just wonderful containers, but sometimes it's really hard to figure out what kind of container, what size container do you need for other things. And here it's sort of part of the reduce, reuse, recycle. This is sort of the reusing, so it's or repurposing what's already existing. The nice thing about sort of reconfiguring or repurposing the container that something already came in is that you already know that everything is going to magically fit into the container. Maybe not the exact same configuration, but it should all fit. These little coffee creamers are actually also really good if you ever make boba tea at home. They're vanilla-y and creamy, and they're quite nice. So in speech therapy, they talk a lot about sort of containering, and there's this concept where you basically want to put like items together with other like items. And sometimes, well, I guess before the brain injury, I used to think of like items as things like put all of the crayon colors together, put all of the different paints together, because then you have a group of, oh, these are all crayons and these are all paint. But if you take that sort of maybe level 1 concept and step it up to like maybe a level 5 concept or something more advanced, you would actually be grouping together things that you would use together. So if you were making coffee, for instance, you'd maybe have the coffee pod, and you'd have the coffee creamer and the sugar if you're going to have any, and the coffee stir, and maybe like a napkin. And all of those items would sort of be together. You'd probably also have your drink cup, but in terms of like the actual ingredients or the things that go into the cup, you would have all of those similar items together, because you don't really use them individually, you use them collectively as a group. So part of what I'm trying to do with this drawer is making a bunch of little collections of things that you would probably use together, as opposed to individually one-off things. And I would say the drink side of the drawers is very much a good example of that, and it's very much a speech therapy type of real-world activity, and it would be sort of part of the cognitive rehab part of speech therapy. So here I'm trying to just sort of reorient everything so that all of the writing is facing the same way and is easily readable or legible, versus it being in a bunch of different locations. And right behind it, deeper in the drawer, I put sort of the overflow. There was an extra box of creamer. It was sort of a 1+1, or not a buy one get one free, but something where you had to buy two of things to get them to be able to purchase it for the price that I'd wanted to, which was less per unit. So right now I'm just trying to group sort of matches and lighters and things like that all in the same place together. So also on the bottom, the yellow that's there, that's actually craft paper. So if you've ever taught in a classroom, particularly for elementary or middle school, or you happen to know of any teacher friends, or maybe you could just go to an art supply store, you can find these really large reams of colored paper, which works out really well if you're trying to line shelves relatively inexpensively. It also makes it a little bit easier to tell or to visually see when there's dirt or things like that. And it's pretty easy to take out later and just shake it off if you have some crumbs, and so it's easier to clean, and it's a good option if you want to line a drawer or a shelf. So just to give you a peek at all the things that were previously in this drawer that I've sort of pulled out, and I'm right now just trying to quickly go through. The reason you want to save, those are little pretzel salts things, but the reason you want to save the little bits that you're snipping off of the sort of boxes is because they fit perfectly well inside of the boxes, and you can use them sort of as dividers, or makeshift dividers. And the nice thing about them is if you use the little pieces that were from the boxes originally, they're probably going to fit, so you won't have to do too much tailoring or adjustments or anything like that to sort of better segment off these larger containers. Now this is something I think lots of families have, these sort of little sauce packets, which are usually quite tasty, but maybe you might have grabbed a few extra, or they gave you a few extra with your takeout order. So I'm just trying to sort of line them up here, and it turns out they actually fit pretty well in this divided box, which I think is an IKEA sandwich bag box. So as I'm watching along with this back and recording my voice with it, I'm realizing it seems like this drawer has a lot of seemingly miscellaneous things, but they're not that miscellaneous to me. But I would say if you're trying to do this at home, give yourself some grace. If this still seems a little bit of a hodgepodge. That's okay. You know, you can always move stuff around or shift, or if it doesn't fit, then maybe it just belongs somewhere else. I think there's this concept in sort of organization or cleaning or tidying or whatever you want to call it, sort of home ec related things, about how everything should have a home and you need to return things back to their home so that it's easy to find and whatnot. But sometimes, especially after a brain injury, cognitively wise, it can be a little bit hard to figure out what are all the different little homes for things if you didn't really think about that beforehand. So I guess there's also this term, or what I'm going to call a term, I don't know if it's really an official term, but sort of umbrella-ing, or if you have difficulty with word finding as well, sort of, that's okay. But the concept that I'm thinking of is when you're grouping things together and you're trying to find stuff together, like see here how I'm going through different little packets, but maybe I don't know the overall name of that umbrella category, and you know what, that's okay. Like if you can't think of a good name for it, or it's just not coming to mind, that's okay. Still try to group what you can, and as long as it makes sense to you, that's really what matters in terms of functionality. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm taking little pieces of scrap sort of from the clippings from the tops of the box, or the box tops, so that I can make little dividers between the different packets, mostly so it can be a little bit easier to select exactly the packet that I'm looking for, and easier to visually differentiate aside from just the color, but also having a little bit of physical separation in space, which helps visually. So we have lots of little dividers, but what I'm trying to look for are basically the little scraps from the box that I'm using right now to container the little sauce packets, just so it's a little bit easier to figure out the size without having to do too much alteration for the dividers. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking the scrap piece of box top and sort of laying it on top of the open box, so I can try to figure out where I need to cut so that the divider width can be okay. I just made a little tear. Now I'm just going to snip it with some of the kitchen shear scissors and then insert it in between. It's a little bit smaller than it needed to be, but that's okay. It is what it is. So I don't know if you can tell right now, but if you look at the sort of the orange colored packets, I'm actually staggering them a little bit. So every other is going a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. I'm also doing it with the red packet and the black packets, just anything where I have multiple packets. But you can see it easiest with these orange ones that are right here, which I'm pulling out, but I'll try to do it again. Right now, it looks like I'm reorganizing it based on level of spiciness. But this was actually a tip that I got from the Organize with Tracy channel. So whenever you have something that's a little bit skinnier than the slot that you're trying to use it for, such as these sauce packets, if you actually stagger them so it's every other is sort of sticking a little bit out to the opposite side, it actually holds its place a little bit more in the drawer or in the slot and is less likely to slide down, as opposed to if you just stack them directly one behind the other. So it's a good tip. I think there's another shot coming up that will show this a little bit easier. This staggering back and forth, a little to the left and a little to the right with the packets, as you can see, it's a really subtle difference, but it's something that when you actually try it or see it in practice, it makes all the difference in the world in terms of having things not slide around as much and just be a little bit more secure and taking up some more visual presence in that space. So that's always helpful and nice. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut up some other dividers for the different slots. So I'd say this drawer is coming along quite nicely, and I'm really proud of how it's turning out. And it's really good also to take a moment and just sort of open and close the drawer periodically to make sure that everything kind of slides in and out okay, nothing gets caught. So I'm now going to take this Decaf green tea container box and do the same type of thing with clipping off the top parts of it, just so that I can use the bottom part for a bigger container to hold some other items. Do you have any tips for containering at home? If so, leave them below in the comments. I'd like to take a look at them, and maybe others should find them helpful as well. One of the things I really like about reusing these containers is it's a really inexpensive thing. You've already purchased it. Just most of the time people don't tend to think of the boxes things come in as a reusable container or to repurpose things, but I find it this actually to be a really useful and helpful hack. So I think one of the really nice things about doing a project like this is that it can be a bit meditative, especially if it's repetitive and you're using your hands for something like using scissors to clip something off, or just rotating stuff around like this. There's something about a repetitive type activity that can help you get into a sense of flow, and I find that can be quite helpful and calming and meditative. From a rehab perspective, I think it's also really important to sort of have a sense of curiosity and wonder, but in particular for trying to look for and really celebrate opportunities in your everyday real life to sort of apply the skills or practice the types of skills that you're learning in OT and that you're learning in speech therapy. Because the fact of the matter is, for most people, rehab will end at some point, or maybe you'll need to take a break. Sometimes it's cost related, sometimes it's coverage related, sometimes it's quota related, but oftentimes I would say it ends probably a lot sooner than the patient would find helpful, and which probably the rehab team would agree with. But unfortunately there are just certain limitations that exist in terms of being able to get direct care from folks who are super really skilled at what they do. So it's important to try to do these types of activities as homework, but just, in little bits and pieces, and finding ways to realize that, you can really build upon and practice the skills that you're learning and that you're trying so hard cognitively to regain as part of your recovery. So right now what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to flip this coffee box around, because there was that little, if you look now on the right side, this little missing cutout on the side that was having these little coffee pods keep falling every time I was opening the drawer. So now I'm rotating it so that hopefully the side of the drawer itself, the sort of vertical white part on the right side of the photo, can maybe help hold in the coffee pods a little bit better. And then I'm also going to take this opportunity to sort of reorganize these so that it's all the lighter colored one, which is the New England coffee French roast on the left in brown, a lighter brown, sort of a caramelly color, and then the Starbucks French roast in the darker brown on the right, as opposed to the way it was before, where it was a little bit mixed in the second row. So here it just makes it a little bit easier visually to see all the same things together. And you don't think it's that much, or maybe it's just a lot of being organized or something like that, but there's so much cognitive energy that's involved throughout your day, and chances are you're not gonna make really big gains by changing really big things. Instead, where you're going to find energy conservation is when you are saving time with little things, such as putting similar colors all together vertically. So I'd recommend that whenever possible. So right now I'm taking out these really fragrant loose leaf teas that I have, and I'll try to link the Etsy shop below for where I got that little tea pouch, because I can see other people also thinking that it's probably cute and adorable. The person who made it, I don't think she has any more of that particular print, but you never know, maybe she might. I found both of these items, the pouch, which actually is, it's a PUL, I don't know if it means polyurethane line, I'm not sure, but it's the type of thing you would use like in reusable diapers on the inside, so it's completely washable. The outside is fabric, or wipeable rather, I guess, on the inside if you spill anything. And then these are also some loose leaf teas that are quite fragrant and lovely, and I got them at a holiday market, so I'll try to link the information for those below if I can find it, because I think they're all nice. Sort of as a side note, there's this Scandinavian concept called hygge. It's spelled Hygge. I mispronounced it for a long time because it kind of sounds, when you read it, it looks almost like hygge, or that's what I thought it was, but actually it's pronounced hygge. But it basically translates as coziness, and I think there's something really cozy and sweet about brewing a nice cup of tea or cup of toffee or something that's warm, and sitting by like a cozy fireplace and listening to good music and just sort of relaxing and taking it easy. So I think it's something that's great that you can do by yourself in terms of wellness, but I also think it's something that lends itself to a communal aspect where you can have, friends, family, loved ones over and share in that experience too. And it doesn't just need to be in cold winter months or in the fall. It's something that you can do year round. as I'm watching this back, I'm realizing that one of the things I'm really proud of is how much I'm shifting around these different packets and looking at different configurations and trying to figure out, wait, maybe not what works best, because I'm not really sure that I know what would be best, but maybe what works better than what previously might have, especially when you're not just looking at the little individual compartments and components, but sort of the configuration as part of the larger drawer as a whole. And this type of resiliency and willingness to try different configurations and layouts, and maybe something works and maybe something doesn't work, or you just move stuff back and forth, and maybe you thought it'd be better somewhere else, but you realize, no, it was probably better in the other place, and you move it back, and having the freedom to do that, and the willingness to do that, I think, is a really helpful skill that you sort of learn about and you really cultivate a sense of mindfulness with it, at least as part of the rehab process. I think it's kind of interesting how much, I guess, with a brain injury and with the cognitive rehab part, it wasn't until I had a brain injury that I realized that there's really a lot of stuff that you do every single day automatically, without thinking. There's a lot of habitual related things. But once you have a brain injury, every single thing pretty much needs to be intentional. And right now here, I'm sort of interweaving the little to the left, a little to the right packets, I was saying, from the Organize with Tracy tip, but just to sort of, from a width perspective, fill out that divider space a little bit better and hold the packets better in place, and conserve some space as well, lengthwise, so than would otherwise be the case if everything was just packed together exactly one behind the other instead of interwoven. But yeah, so pretty much with a brain injury, when you're trying to do something like this, every single thing is sort of an intentional choice, and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't, and that's okay. And it's hard to think about just how much cognitive energy is really involved in making those individual intentional choices versus something that's maybe a bit more habitual. This is something I'll try to cover a little bit more in my review of the Power of Habit book, because I think there's a lot of really good tips there. But anyway, moving on, I'm now adding into these compartments that have the loose leaf tea, these loose leaf tea steepers or containers, the things that you need to put the loose leaf tea in so that you can remove it easily after it's done steeping in the hot water. So this is just a little pyramid one that I got I guess a number of years ago through this program. It was something called NIFT. It was so cool. It was about supporting local businesses, and you got sort of a small gift certificate amount that came from a different local business to spend on. So if you got it from local business A, it was, $10 or $15 or $5, whatever it was. It varied, to spend on local business B. And the idea was that you were going to present some foot traffic in other places, and it was sort of shopping small and supporting other local communities. So I think that's a nice concept. But what I'm doing here is I'm taking the little containers that I have to steep the loose leaf tea, the little pyramid and the little cute robot, and putting them together in the same overall container, because you would use them together. You would use the little loose leaf teas and put it inside of these little steepers, and then you would take the entire component, the little components all put together as one big component, and put it into your cup of tea. So very much a speech therapy concept in terms of compartmentalizing similar things together, or things that would be used together, because you wouldn't just use the robot by itself, you wouldn't just use the loose leaf teas by themselves, you would use them paired up together. So trying to have that strategy is really helpful in terms of creating more functionality in your everyday life. I think another really great skill that sort of comes out of having a brain injury, although not necessarily, but I would say a really good skill, a nice one to have, is this concept of patience and the concept of good things really taking time to do. As you can see with this, especially since this is done in, relatively real time, it takes a lot of effort. It's not something that just happens overnight, and especially if you're early on in your recovery, just to even do this activity could take you an entire day. It just depends on how things are, and whatever the length of time that it takes you, know that that's the right amount of time that it has to take for you, and that it gets to take for you. And the important part is, trying your best, and if you need to take a lot of breaks, if you need to take a nap, that's okay too. It'll still be there when you wake back up from your nap. So just having the patience, not just with the world and with everything, but also with yourself, is something that I think you really learn to cultivate along this process, because at the end of the day, there's only so much you personally can do. The best you can do is, take your time, follow what your medical team is recommending, and do your best, and know that these things aren't easy, and nothing worthwhile rarely ever is easy. It's usually something you have to work really hard for, and know that you're doing the best that you can, and be patient, and good things will come. Do you have a drawer in your home that you would like to organize, or that you have organized, that you've figured out some really cool hacks for, or that you think just looks really beautiful, or that you're really proud of? If so, leave a photo or talk to us about it in the comments. It'd be great to see. I don't know if you can actually, maybe you can't put a photo in YouTube, but I may try to make an Instagram post maybe, and if so, maybe you can put them from there. I'm not exactly sure how it works. I'm kind of newish to figuring out social media related things, but would love to know if you guys are able to find any of this inspiring, or if you've taken any of these tips and applied them to your life, or if you have some other tips that you think would be great that others would find helpful, or you're just really proud of the work that you're doing. Please share that information in the comments below. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm repeating some of the visual, because I want to show you the speech therapy skill. So do you see how I'm moving my hands across the drawer from the upper left over to the right, and then I'm moving it down a little bit, and then I'm still going side to side with my hand. So the methodical order for it is to go from upper left all the way over to upper right, and then go down from middle left to middle right, and then bottom left to bottom right, so that there's like a repetitiveness to it. So this is really important, because if you have difficulty with visual tracking or taking in a lot of visual information all at once, which this drawer definitely is, because there's a lot of stuff going on, it can actually be really helpful if you sort of have a cursor or something to track, and it's easier to visually track a big item like your finger or your hands than it is to track an invisible item, like not using your finger or your hands as sort of like a pointer. So I would definitely recommend it. This particular tip is actually really, really helpful if you are overwhelmed when you are in a grocery store and trying to look at all of the different shelves. I have different grocery store shopping tips I'll try to give maybe in another video or article or something later, but using your hand and your fingers and using what you have to sort of help you and assist you with your visual tracking will also make it feel less nauseating and less sickening as you're trying to do things and perform like a visual search on something for whatever the item is that you're looking for. It's also really helpful because your arm is long, and when you have your arm in front of you, it takes up a lot of visual space and it draws your eye to whatever exactly it is that you're looking for, and you're basically looking for whatever's on the other end of your arm. So on the end of your arm is your hand, and on the end of your hand is your finger, and whatever's on the end of your finger is visually what you want to be looking at. So instead of taking the entire thing in at once, if you're trying to search piece by piece, it can be really, really helpful to, use what you have and use your body as kinesthetically part of doing this activity that otherwise maybe you would have just done very quickly visually with your eyes without having to have any movement, just looking at something. But post brain injury, having this type of what would they call it? They would call it an accommodation. It's an accommodative activity that sort of acts as a crutch to help your brain out until it can get better at doing it, hopefully on its own again, with visually tracking on its own without making you feel sick and debilitating, and instead help you have more function in your everyday life. So I hope that this has helped you so much. This drawer is something that I am super proud of. It took me a long time to do, and I'm really glad that I was able to pull these things together. So from an OT perspective, from a speech therapy perspective, I was able to utilize a number of different skills, thanks in particular to Organize with Tracy. I would definitely recommend following her for just really great info and inspiration for how to better organize things. But I never would have thought of, or it never had occurred to me previously, to cut the box tops off of containers that you already have. So you didn't need to, break the bank and spend extra money on getting, different Tupperware style containers that may or may not fit exactly what you're looking for, where you can just, modify what you already have, and it just makes it a lot easier to see what you're looking for. The other thing too is just from a pre-attentive aspect, noticing, colors together in sizes and shapes, I think is really helpful. This concept of attention never really came up, or I didn't really learn about until speech therapy as part of cognitive rehab, and this idea that in order to focus on something, you have to give your attention to it. But what we may not realize is that there are these other types of visual and or social cues, but mostly visual, that are pre-attentive, things that your subconscious picks up on before your consciousness, your attention is focused on something. Things that, and it's these precognitive, pre-attentive attributes that can help create a sense of calm and organization and flow, that, as opposed to seeing a really big jumbled mess. A really good example of that are really great cartographers who are able to condense a lot of really important critical information into a very legible and intelligible and understandable design when they're creating really great maps. And if you try to think of your life a little bit as sort of a visual map, and there's just layers of information, and organizing that information visually in terms of importance via size, shape, color, prominence, saturation of hue, all these other attributes, it can really help you stay on task and stay focused on the things that matter the most. So that's something to cover in another video in more detail, but hopefully this gives you a great start and some inspiration, and you can have a space that you feel really proud of too, and feel that it's accomplishable. Even, maybe it takes you 5 minutes, maybe it takes you 5 days. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're trying and that you're doing the best that you can, and the only person that you have to compete against is yourself and no one else. So celebrate the wins that you have and feel proud of it. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching this video. I hope that you found it helpful. Please make sure to like and subscribe if at all possible. It really helps the channel. Basically, these videos make absolutely no money unless it can later potentially be monetized down the road, and that won't happen unless there's at least 1,000 subscribers and at least 4,000 hours of continuous watch time on a rolling basis within a year or within a 12-month period. So I am very, very far off from that, but if you found this helpful, please like, subscribe, share it with others who you think might also find it helpful, and I hope you have a really lovely day. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Bye.